Hi, I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, we are getting the chance to have a conversation with Lilianna. If you missed her first episode, you can tune in to episode 6 after this. That episode focused on reluctant readers and a YA standing for Young Adult Book Flight for boys. She is a treasure trove of knowledge. I feel so lucky that we get another opportunity to hear her tips. Today we are going to focus on reading aloud and a YA book flight for girls. Welcome to the show, Lilianna.
Thank you so much. I feel so lucky to be the first repeat guest.
Yay, I'm so
Yeah,
glad to have you.
thank
So,
you.
for those that might not have gotten to listen to our first episode together before today, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Well, I am first and foremost, I'm a reader, teacher, mother. I'm a reading specialist, and I taught middle school for many years. And again, I just love reading and everything it does for people. So I just love getting the opportunity to be on a show like this and maybe give some tips that would help others and parents or even teachers or just anybody who's on the reading journey, which hopefully we all are, or helping others on that journey.
Yeah, I love our conversation that we have on like the sidebar, right? In our messenger conversation, we're always chatting books, and I feel like you have so many great recommendations even in there. So I feel like our guests are really lucky to hear a little snippet into our conversation.
Thank you. And I'm so happy to be here.
Okay, so I actually went to a conference this weekend, and it was on reading and writing with Andrew Pudewa, for those who've maybe heard his name, but he has a Institute for Excellence in Writing, and he talked a lot about reading and, writing being like one of the most complex processes that we do. And he was saying so much about like how we had to have the words in our brain to be able to translate them and to put them out onto paper and in a writing format, right? To be able to synthesize that. Like it was like a 4-step process to even be able to write the word down on the paper. But he talked so much about that, that the words had to be in the brain. And I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this because he said it could be that they've heard the words by reading them, right? They've seen them visually, or it can also be that they've heard the words verbally through reading aloud. And he brought up this point, and I was like, it's so true. He's like, up to a certain point when your kids learn to read, they're going to be reading aloud because they're essentially reading it to themselves in their brain, and it's another way for their brain to process what they're reading, to hear it verbally to themselves, even though they're visually also reading it on the paper.
Yes.
And he's like, and then they get to a certain age where something clicks and they don't need to verbally read to themselves anymore. But I would love to get your thoughts on reading aloud because that's something I try to prioritize in our house just so my kids can get the additional language and the additional words they're hearing. And it's just fun, right? To snuggle up and read a book together. So,
Yes, there's so much there, and I wish I could have gone to that conference because that's right up my alley. I think that writing, well, first of all, learning vocabulary in context is always going to be the best way to learn vocabulary because even though we do have, isolated vocabulary word lists that students will learn, they don't take root the same way as learning them in the context when you're reading or speaking. And that's why I always encourage in general, don't ever talk down to your children. Always
Mhm.
speak to that little bit of a higher level. And, that's how they're going to be picking up those words. Although it is, you see a cute baby, you can't help but the baby talk for a second. But in general, try to use vocabulary around your kids as they're going to be absorbing more than you realize. But when it comes to using, when kids transition to become writers, the ones that really read a lot and really got that all like to understand all facets of a word and how it's used and the connotation to it, those are the ones that typically take off as richer writers. It comes more naturally to them. Now, I love all writers, and when kids are emerging writers and middle school writers, some of them, once they discover the thesaurus feature on Word, and they wanted to like beef up their writing, they would go nuts with it. And sometimes it doesn't work, just because it's a synonym, it doesn't work in that context. And, I
Yeah.
always just praise them for trying. But the ones that really understand it more typically are the ones that have more experience with the reading and really have seen that word five different ways, and so they can really use it in different aspects. So that goes back to the values that come from reading aloud. And on the last podcast, I tried to cover as many things as I could. There's so many things to cover, and I know I can't even still, it would be books and books and many podcasts, which is why you'll have plenty of episodes to cover material. But I didn't really get a chance. We talked briefly about reading aloud,
Hmm.
and there's an amazing book that I wanted to put a plug in for the Read Aloud family,
Such a good one.
making meaningful connections, making meaningful and lasting connections with your kids by Sarah Mackenzie. I feel like every parent needs to read this book. It's so accessible and fun to read, and she makes it seem just, she not only hits on all the values of reading aloud to your kids at all ages, but really gives great recommendations and fun ways to do it. And I think she sounds hilarious. I'd love to meet her or hear more from her. And she has a podcast.
Yeah, it's called Read Aloud. It's called Read Aloud Revival. So if you're like, I don't have time to read another book, you can tune in to her podcast. She's been podcasting for a long time. And you could go and they're labeled very nicely. So you could go to, they're labeled by age ranges of your kids, boys, girls. So you
Oh,
could go
nice.
find the one that fits and tailor it to your kids. So that could be a quick way if you want to just get some brief introduction to Sarah. But yeah, she's fantastic. I've listened to her podcast before.
Then a lot of this is, inspired by her or just other ideas I've had. So some of these things she mentions on in her book, but just spending the time to read aloud with your kids, the value, it just cannot be matched. And reading in general. And I think when you have to get kids to fall in love with reading first, and when they're just decoding, and sometimes it's a little of a struggle, and they're motivated to read, but it's challenging on their brains, and they're spending
Mm-hmm.
so much time trying to decode those words that they're not necessarily always grasping the full rich meaning of them. So reading to them and taking the pressure off of them having to even think aside from just making those connections with the text and just getting to enjoy it, that's when they're going to fall in love with reading, when you're reading to them. And then it's going to transition towards them reading themselves, just like this age group. From young adults we're talking about, we want them to obviously be able to read independently successfully, but they can benefit a lot from being read aloud too, and they really do love it. My students would love it in middle school. Like I say, okay, I'm going to read to you. Oh, they loved it. They get comfortable, they'd settle in, and they still just love it. I think reading to them, when you read aloud to them and you just let them just get to experience the text, it builds so many things in them. And the first thing, without a doubt, I try to imagine a world without imagination and innovation,
Yeah.
and how we wouldn't have all the inventions and cool things and everything that we love and get to enjoy as a society
Yeah.
without that imagination and innovation from adults, or even kids.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are turning into inventors. There, so many little geniuses out there, but all of that is really, I believe, fostered from getting to explore these texts and getting to
Okay.
go into other worlds and thinking. So it really piques their imagination. They have to picture things. And
Yeah.
watching a show is different, like you're seeing it all.
Do you think it's a skill that you can build or
I think if you've ever been around a very young child, and we have,
yeah.
and seen them play, you're just blown away by it, just how
Yeah.
open and creative they are.
Yeah.
And, free with their thoughts. Everything is, even like a blade of grass or whatever. You see them playing with the, a piece of fluff, like the
Yeah.
box that you bought something in. Everything is, and they just, that kind of gets stamped out of them,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes by the structure of school, which I know that there's a place and purpose for these things. Having to sit down and be quiet, how to be, proper in this environment, that environment, behave, these different things that we have to kind of get them into the norms of society. But
Sure.
sometimes that does also tamper that down a little bit. But then you open them up to these worlds and books that are just, they can be free and imagination can just flourish in them. So I think that's one of the biggest things. It's just imagining. And even I'll say like a little plug here for poetry in general. I
Mm-hmm.
try to at night. read something like Shel Silverstein poems or something to my
Yeah.
daughter, just
I read
short.
those as a kid.
Oh, she loves them. And it's like that, she's like, what? Like, it's just like the story about the clam that, like, not much, clam doesn't matter about this or that, just these little things that the two tailed dog or something.
Yeah.
It just makes her think in different ways. She's like, this is what? And she's just kind of blown away.
I am always impressed what the authors can do with words in such a short amount of, sentences of the structure.
Yes.
And this is a plug right here. I would love to have a guest on that reads poetry to come talk to me as for adults, because that is something I have gotten away from as
Mm,
an adult. We do a bit of it with our homeschooling curriculum for my oldest, but I don't read it myself, and I do think there's value of it for the
so
adults. So if
much.
there's someone out there listening that wants to come talk to me about poetry, let me know.
Yes, you need that because
So,
that's the other thing. Talk about freeing. Poetry just can abandon, like E. Cummings. I'm not capitalizing my name. I mean, I don't want to.
yeah.
You can abandon all those grammatical rules and just do whatever you want. And poetry, really, I love that aspect of it. It's super freeing. So, yes, I would love to hear that episode with someone who,
Yeah,
I
I'll
mean, I
find
have
someone.
some knowledge, but let's find someone who's really good. So then we have the imagination piece, and then the ability to just have that deeper comprehension because you're not focusing on trying to also read it. And and then one thing, let's talk about this particular age group, young adult girls or boys. But really,
Yeah.
the journey is not an easy one. We know we've been through it, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that age group in general is tough. There's so many things that they've got going on socially, emotionally, their bodies, everything. There's so many things that they're trying to struggle with, and it's when you can read these texts with them and you kind of get to hold their hand through these experiences, even living them vicariously through, the characters, and kind of grapple with these ideas and speak with them about, well, wow, that's how would you handle the situation? Wow, I can't believe this happened. Wow, I would never have thought that, this betrayal would happen, that this character would have turned like that, and have those conversations that you really, it's almost like those after school specials, those bad ones we used to see as a kid, that, kind of tried to send a message, and I get what they were doing, that didn't really resonate as much as these type of conversations you can have with your child and get to experience that with them because you won't be there in school or in those other environments likely when they're experiencing them on
Yeah.
their own. So it's nice to have those talks with them and kind of work through the ideas. And
Yeah. And we want to prepare our kids, right, to go out in the world. So I think, like you said, it gives you another avenue to really maybe address some of these things. And then hopefully your child will feel more confident when
yes,
approached with that situation when they're in school. I can almost, as you're talking about this time period, I can almost feel the tension still of how awkward I
yeah,
was
I
during this
know.
time.
I needed so much guidance. I was just
Yeah.
tripping my way through things, like
Oh,
honestly.
yeah. It was bad. My poor mother.
But I
So,
think it will, and then like you were saying, like they'll be able to be more confident, and then I think that connection with you is the grounding we want all the kids to have. The connection with
mhm.
the people that are really 100% always there for them, always have their backs. That I always would tell my students, I guarantee you're never going to find someone in your corner like your parents. You know what I mean? Your parents are always going to be there for you, or I hope so. I hope they have those parents in their lives. And, just as they go through those time periods, it's really hard to maintain that sense of self and maintain that
Yeah.
foothold and stay grounded. And so I think that those conversations and, all of that, those moments are priceless. So,
Yeah. The peer pressure at that age is
oh my
big.
goodness, it's huge. It's everything. And I think that I remember, and I can't remember, I think you and I maybe read it from a book, or I don't remember. It's all, melts together. But there was that one where it talks about, first generation, and I'm first generation American on my dad's side, but and so I had a dad with a very strong accent, and I have no accent from that experience with him because really, you see a lot of these first generation kids that have an American accent because they're around their peers, and the influence of the peers is so strong, like that. You usually from the school environment, you pick up more than you do necessarily at home, and I think that's like just a small example of how the influence of the peers can outweigh the influence of the parents at times,
Yeah.
just a way to consider it.
And I think at that age range, they're wanting to be more around their peers, right? It kind of makes that
Hmm.
switch. And I know in the conference this weekend, he talked about this age. Um, and they start to be really competitive amongst their peers too. So he's like, you can, as a parent, take that and capitalize it and maybe have your child enroll in a writing competition.
Yes.
Like that would, he's like, I've never seen kids work harder when they're in a competition for something, whether it's a science fair or a writing, a writing exposition, but that you could take that and capitalize on it and to your advantage, right? To help them hone whatever skill you're wanting them to work on because of that
Oh, yes.
competitiveness amongst their peers at that age.
Oh, they definitely are. Even the smallest things, it's fun to watch. But no, I agree. And I think learning about those resources in your community and your school is a great resource. And libraries, people forget about libraries have awesome programs too. So they might even have some of these competitions or things that they're hosting that is just a free resource for parents too.
Yeah. I know there's so much to navigate out there, right? And where to find it.
I know, and luckily there's plenty, so that's great. Just how to find it.
Yeah.
But and now circling back to, and so yes, the writing is going, or reading is reading aloud, and having those conversations and building their empathy and wow, feeling for these characters and getting to walk in their shoes and all those things that are so amazing, and think critically about situations as they're reading. All that is really positive. But to circle back to the writing that you mentioned in the beginning, that you can always tell when you speak with someone or you read their writing if they're a reader. I really believe so. And just in the last episode, which was episode 10 with Desiree, when
Hmm.
I was listening to it, I was like, she's obviously a reader. She really understands language. The way she phrases things is really beautiful. And so I think that just carries over. And it's interesting to talk to people who do that. It's if they introduce different ways of phrasing or vocabulary, or it just sounds so beautiful, they're using a lot of metaphors and they're just speaking to them, people want to speak to that person. I think, at
Yeah.
least I do. I'm like, I'm learning from them.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is just you're always reading just great writing, if you are, and you're adopting little bits and pieces and using it, putting it into your vocabulary bank. Or
Back to the reading aloud, I think when you're going to read to aloud to a child, no matter what age, right, you're probably reading a book that is more advanced than where they're at. So that's where they're also getting that language,
hmm
where they're not sitting, having to struggle over every single word that they're reading. And so that's increasing their vocabulary. And again, like verbally or visually, they can be increasing the vocabulary that's inside their brains. So either avenue, right, is just as good.
oh, definitely. And you always want to read something that's a little past where they can currently read themselves, or depending on your child and their interests, because that's kind of showing them the future of what they're working towards, that they can grab these books in the future and be able to just read them on their own. So I think I think everyone understands like how valuable reading in general is, but the reading aloud at all ages, it's something that the value can't be overstated.
And I
But
think your kids will remember that, right? Like they're not going to look back and be like all the minutia of what you do in the day, but I think those
yes,
moments, if you really prioritize reading aloud, like that's probably what they're going to remember, right? As we used to sit
yes,
around as a family and we would read this. So back to even as adults, right? We've talked so much about this, is structuring it, scheduling it into your day. You'll have to do that with your family too, and where you're doing this, right? Whether you're right after dinner when everyone's still at the dinner table, let's
yes,
just do a chapter. Or we've cleaned up dinner and we're heading towards bed, maybe, right? Because maybe other kids have sports. I know life gets busy. But right before everybody goes to bed, let's all circle up. We'll read a chapter together, and inevitably, I think, was it you and I that talked about this? Is like if you're starting kids reading and you're aiming for 15 minutes, inevitably, sometimes that'll turn into 20, 25 minutes. Like it
yes.
may become a little bit longer. So you'll get so much out of it. And I think my experience in reading aloud with the kids, it's brought up so many other conversations that we would not have in our everyday life. And even the words, right? Like there is words that I do not say in my everyday language that we're experiencing in reading aloud. And so
Yes.
that's even expanding them because I don't talk like I'm reading, or like books are written.
Therefore, I know
Yeah.
exactly. We don't typically say, a lot of the words that are written
Yeah,
aren't in our conversational language. So
absolutely.
some of these ideas, Sarah Mackenzie's book, she has some great ideas about how to incorporate reading aloud with your family, and she's hilarious. She talks about bringing food, baking food, and they will come. Baking a pan of brownies, they'll smell it, they'll be there as they're eating the brownies. You're reading something, or they make they'll do like picnics outside or popcorn on the living room floor, like push the furniture, get a big bag of popcorn, everyone lay around. She talks about some of the activities you can do, and the idea that the kids have to sit exactly, cuddled up on the couch, which I love. It doesn't always have to be, some you have active littler kids. They can be coloring or working on a puzzle while you're reading, and they're still absorbing that. And sometimes my daughter will like to just, she's drawing a picture while I'm reading something to her, and then we'll stop and talk about it. And it's just all good. It doesn't have to be, kids don't like to sit still all the time. They're bouncing around everywhere, but they're still hearing it. So
Yeah, I think if their hands are busy, that helps.
yes,
Doesn't mean their
definitely.
brains are turned off, but their hands are busy.
Definitely. And I think that another thing is in those carpools, so the audiobooks is
Mhm.
a great other way of having them. They don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a paper copy book, and you can all enjoy it as a family. And there's a lot of great ones that you will enjoy too. So it's not just having to suffer through, there's some like, there's a million variety of little, unicorn cat version books that my daughter loves that maybe aren't the
Yeah.
ones that I'm going to want to pick up myself, but we can have audiobooks that everyone will enjoy. And it doesn't always have to be eyes on paper. I love audiobooks. They're still getting exposure to the vocabulary, and you can have a discussion about it. So I think whenever you're on the go somewhere, you can definitely pop in the audiobook, and that's another great read aloud time.
Yeah, it's such a way to reclaim your time, I think, right? Like you're already going to be on the road. You're inevitably have things you have to do, right? You have activities out of the house. And we've really started we started with audiobooks on road trips actually.
Hmm.
But now it's morphed into more. We're busier this year with things we have. And so now it's morphed into the chapter books that we're reading for school have become car school. So,
School on the go.
yeah, exactly. But we usually have the physical book at home. So when we can, we'll read it on the physical copy. If not, we're reading it on the road. And I've even laughed aloud at these books. Like I've enjoyed them myself. So
Yes, and your recommendation to me, a long way from
from
Chicago to
Chicago.
from Chicago. We did that on our last road trip because it was 5 hours each way. So I mean, it was perfect that we all got to listen to it and talk about it, and my daughter loved it. So there's so
Yeah.
many great books out there that the whole family's going to enjoy.
Plug for that. Such a good book.
Yes.
I've recommended it to lots of people.
And another hidden gem, speaking about audiobooks, our podcasts are now doing stories just like back in the day when we weren't alive and kids were tuning in for the next episode of some sort of radio program,
Yeah.
that they have amazing podcast stories. So one that is going to engage every single child, no matter who, I would say around say age, yeah, 8 and up, because it gets a little intense, exciting, but nothing bad in it, is the 6 Minutes podcast. And I
Okay.
may have told you about it before, I don't remember, but it's only 6 minutes each episode. And
Perfect.
there's always a cliffhanger. And I would kind of make it a reward system for my class. Okay, if we get everything we need done and everyone's on task and we're, checking all our boxes, we can listen to a podcast, at the 6 minutes at the end of class,
Yeah.
and they would go nuts for it. And then
That's cool.
I had kids that would come in and say, I listened to the whole podcast this weekend. Yeah, I finished it. I'm like, okay, whoa, they couldn't stop. And then they
Yeah.
would, it's just a story again. It's the same type of thing. If you're reading, they're being read aloud to, and they're learning so much in the vocabulary, and it's engaging, it's fun. So there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of options out there.
And I always find that when I'm reading aloud to my kids, I don't have many how do I say this? Voice options for the different characters, which I feel like in audiobooks or podcasting, I bet that some people are super creative in their different
Yes.
voices, which I think would make it so engaging for the kids.
And their listening comprehension when they're being read aloud to, it's important to have that sustained listening comprehension, and it's different for myself, like I know that my listening comprehension is weaker than my typical reading comprehension. So the more I listen to those things, the stronger it's becoming for me, and it's good. Being a good listener is a good thing in life, so we'll set them up for success too that way.
True. And for our kids, right? That's so good. So, one quick question about the 6 minute podcast, is it short stories then, or is it like one story per
It's one
segment and
it's
it
the
keeps
same
going?
it's a like basically another chapter.
Oh, okay. All
Oh,
right.
it's amazing. It starts
Okay.
off, it gets them right in the beginning, and then just sound effects. So that's why it makes me think of those radio programs, the door closing, and they're just to see their eyes, and their eyes would widen when they hear something, someone fell in the water, they'd hear the water splash. What happened? They're on the edge of their seats.
Yeah.
It's an amazing podcast.
All right. I'm going to have to tune into that one as well.
Yeah. So those are just some, there's a lot of options out there and things that you can do to have them reading. And one last thing I had learned about before we'll get into book flight. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to download so many things. Was a noticing wall. I don't know if you've heard of this
I've
in the
not.
past or
Mm-mm.
seen it. So it's something you can do, and our noticing wall is the side of our refrigerator, but you
Okay.
can make something special. But it's something that when kids pass by, like a high traffic area, you can put little things for them to read or see, like quotes,
Okay.
your favorite quotes. They can. I kind of put different magnetic little post-it things so that anybody can write and re-erase on there.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
as soon as if they have a quote they like that from their reading, they want to write it down so everybody else can see it, or you can put a little riddle or a little something, or I've even put like a little math problem with "solve me, help" or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
and then when my daughter will pass by, sometimes she'll just pick up the dry erase and answer it, or and you change it out, and it kind of keeps it at this place where, like, kind of seeing what's new, what's happened, or a joke, or things like that. And it's just, again, reading and engaging and connecting with your kids in a different way. Little
Oh, I
small
love that.
snippets.
It kind of sounds like Central Station or something, right? Like everybody go to the
Yes.
notice board and see.
Yeah, so it's just called. I saw it it's a while ago. Noticing while I just started adding more things to it, or just questions. If you had $1 million, what would you buy? A quick little thing, and then I could write underneath, and then just keep changing it out and make a little reminder in your phone, like add some things to the noticing wall. Otherwise, life gets busy,
Yeah.
and it's just something, again, just another way to connect with them and have something fun going on.
Yeah, and I didn't know there was magnetic post-its, so I'm
Oh
gonna be
yes,
going to check out those later because that would be fun. So
yes.
okay, and I wanted to say really quick, thank you so much for that common sense media tip because I have now been using it on the weekends when we go to choose a family movie together. Like, okay, which one's gonna be good? For
That's
all the age
awesome.
ranges of everybody. What about if you come across a book that maybe your kids are getting, right, or want to read? How, like, do you just steer them away from it? I mean, I guess this could be two ways, right? Because the book could be maybe inappropriate from the content, right? And so that
Yes.
I think could be pretty easy of no, mommy doesn't want you reading this book, like it's a little advanced for you or whatever. But what about books that Sarah Mackenzie actually uses the term fluff that maybe
Yes.
don't have much substance to them? Um, is there like a certain ratio of like, I know you want your kids to read and be engaged. Like, do you let them read a little bit of fluff or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, well, definitely the content ones. And I think this is a kind of a good point to mention, just to be cautious as parents. I know I said this in the last time when it comes, especially for girls, there's going to be different topics that they're interested in, but some authors, especially with the young adult range, because young adult technically could be, 13 plus. And so a lot of our middle schoolers are 13, in seventh grade. They typically turn 13. And then plus all the way up to 18. And there's a big difference between what a 13-year-old should be reading and maybe an 18-year-old should be reading. And unfortunately, it's grouped together in that young
Sure.
adult category. And then you have um, you know, those avid readers in sixth grade that want to be reading what the seventh grade girls are reading. So now you're adding in, 11 to 12-year-olds in that mix. So you have to be really mindful of the books. So there's definitely a lot of content that may be inappropriate. So that's an easy push aside and try to screen it through Common Sense Media or other avenues and get that out. But fluff, or just maybe it's not inappropriate, but you just doesn't align with your values. That's
Mm-hmm.
another thing that there's some books out there, and again, like I mentioned, I don't want to book bash, or I think you mentioned with your friend, but there's some books that are really popular with kids that when you read them, like, it's not necessarily enforcing the best value system. At least it doesn't
Sure.
align with mine. So I try to I will be open with my daughter and say that's not a book for us. Not a book for us at this point.
Yeah.
We have a lot of other choices out there. But when it comes to fluff, and like let me mention, like, my daughter loves some of these. She loves puppies, so any book with a puppy on the cover, or it's got glitter on the cover,
Yeah.
or a unicorn puppy mix creature on the cover, we have it. Oh, I think it's like Kitty Corn or something. I don't know. Some of those books, not a lot happening in them, but she's
Yeah.
so happy reading them. So she's having those positive reading experiences. that I'm okay with, then I just try to add in others,
Okay.
give more options. I don't want to discourage unless it's, like I said, something that's inappropriate
Content.
or
Yeah.
the content I'm not comfortable with for her. But all those others, I'll bring in Magic Tree House or something else because she's 7 going into be 8. And so I'll give her a lot of those other books that I think will be, the Babysitter's Club or something like that. I think will be, yeah, maybe that's also not the richest content, but
Sure.
I remember loving it so much. So I want her to get to have those experiences. It doesn't always have to be a classic or, the most complex written book, but it can just be something that she's enjoying and she's remembering and growing her love as a reader.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that, right, it is a fine balance, right? Like, you don't want to discourage them from reading. And even as adults, yes, I try to read classics, but I'm not always reading that, right? Like, I tend to read those, maybe I've talked about this, on my morning brain, right? In my morning time. Because in the evening, I need something a little bit lighter that I don't have to work so hard at to
Yes.
read, right? Something easier flowing, like, or like a beach read or something
A
that,
beach read. I was thinking of that
yeah,
too. Yes, something it's like this is just fun. This is
yeah.
just, and reading's fun. So if you're having fun and there's nothing bad about it, then I say go for it.
Great. Well, I think all those tips are wonderful. So thank you so much. Do you have any other tips you want to add about that, or should we jump into our book flight?
I say we jump into the book play.
Okay.
I could go on forever.
All right. So, what is the first book we're going to be sampling today?
Okay, so these books are all for again, I'm looking at middle school girls, typically because again, high school opening up, but a lot of these, you'll see a lot of these will be enjoyed by I enjoyed them myself as an adult. So, this first one's historical fiction, which is my favorite genre, and it's called Words on Fire by Jennifer A. Nielsen. And this book, I would say, even starting in sixth grade, sixth, seven, eighth, it would be appropriate. It takes place. First of all, the whole concept of the book is right up our alley because it's about a girl in the late 1800s in Lithuania. The main character's name is Audra, and it's at the time period in history where Lithuania was being invaded by Russia, and they were going through this. I can't remember the process. Basically, trying to change them into Russians, adopt them
Sure.
into the fold, and banning the Lithuanian language, banning all Lithuanian books. And so she kind of takes part in this underground resistance to save the books.
Okay.
So it's really cool. And she herself doesn't start off as I'm a heroine from the beginning. She kind of just wants to have a simple life and doesn't want to be dragged into everything. But events happen, and you kind of go on a journey to see her see the value in it and gain courage. And other characters come in and inspire her, and then she ends up inspiring you. And it's a great book.
I could see where that would be so inspiring, not only for us, but also for kids, right? Of just increasing that courage. Just recently, as a little sidebar, I was reading a story about Joan of Arc, and she
Mm.
resisted for a long time. She was getting, these messages from God, if you're a Christian, but that she was getting these messages from God that she needed to go help the French. And she was resisting because she's like, I'm this young girl. Like, who am I? And there was this quote in there, and it stuck with me. And it was, I start fire from a piece of straw, right? Like, you don't have to be
Wow.
this great, big, significant person. And I think for me, that really gives me comfort of like, if I do everyday things well, right? Like the straw of my life, that's what's going to matter in the long run,
Yes.
right? So it's,
Yes, I love that.
yeah. And I think
And
this
how
book sounds like it is
it
similar.
does.
Yeah.
It does. And it's engaging a lot of, and it, obviously a lot of like near misses and scary things, things that are happening. They're suspenseful, so it keeps it moving. And she also wrote The False Prince, which is a really popular
I've seen that
book
one.
as well. That's, fun for boys and girls to read. So, she's a great author. So I think that Words on Fire is definite one to pick up if they're and then kind of timely now with everything that's happening in our world, that it's
Yeah.
another example of like what they're possibly seeing, but learning about it back then and through the eyes of a character, which could be something that they can connect with now.
Yeah. I love that. Give them a tangible fictional story like we talked about in episode 10, right? It's so much easier to understand history and really learn it through stories, right? If you're connecting
Oh,
with
yes.
it, if you're that'll make the impression on you versus just didactically memorizing what's on the
Yes.
page. So,
Oh, definitely.
all right. Anything else you want to add about that one?
No, I think, and then I love another character. There's a few characters. I think people fall in love with Lucas, who she meets, and there's just some great characters in the book too.
Okay. So that was Words on Fire by Jennifer A. Nielsen. What's the second book we'll be sampling today?
So the second one, let's switch to a graphic novel again because I just want to keep if you haven't heard the other episode that we discussed graphic novels and their value, try to tune in, but they do have a lot of value. And one that's so popular, Raina, I don't know how to say it,
Tell-
Telgemeier, Raina Telgemeier, I think. She wrote the book Smile. And
okay.
actually, she's written several books and is the one that is kind of tagged with converting the Babysitters Club into a graphic novel. She's doing the
Oh,
graphics
okay.
and stuff. So you'll see those Babysitters Club graphic novels and you'll see Raina Raina on there. We're on
Okay.
a first
All
name
right.
basis because I don't want to keep butchering her last name. But the book Smile is autobiographical or kind of like a memoir of that time period in her life when she's 12, and it's hilarious. But it goes through, you'll see right from the get-go, and the fact that it's called Smile, she has an incident that causes her to knock out her two front teeth.
Oh,
And poor thing, it's like talk about adding anything more to what happens to her. And she's got to go through all these dental issues and then try to navigate being a 12-year-old
oh
girl
my
and
goodness.
dealing with friend issues and boys and all these things. And it's hilarious. You see the comedy in it, definitely coming of age, but again, appropriate and
Yeah.
kids can relate to it. And she's really funny and she has several books. So I know kids would fly through this one and just be just hungry for the next one. There's one named Guts. So there's a bunch of them out there, and just really, just at least a quick, fun read for them and get them excited about reading. So again, if they're reluctant to read, you can give them something like this, and they're going to feel really successful and enjoy getting into the story aspects, and hopefully springboard into more traditional chapter books on similar topics if they like comedy and they like relatable material and this will be right up their alley.
Yeah. One thing he mentioned at the conference this weekend too was about he didn't necessarily say graphic novels, but how these pictures for someone that might be a reluctant reader of like they're reading and they're not quite sure they're comprehending what's going on in the story. The pictures really help to affirm for them, oh yeah, okay, I was reading that right, or I was listening correctly, or that you're able to affirm what you're hearing and comprehending it correctly. So
Yes. Yes, and they could just feel successful as a reader and
yeah.
just fall in love with the stories, which is what we all do, right?
Yeah.
It's not the decoding that's exciting, it's just the stories. And then again, also, I fall in love with learning new words all the time, and I always do. There's always going to be words that we're exposed to that we didn't know. So all of that is great, and I definitely think there's a lot of great graphic novels out there, but there's also a lot of others that may have content that is not as appropriate. So read parent reviews, try to those are some that you can kind of flip through easily and
Okay.
get an idea of as well. So that's the benefit of a graphic novel, but there's plenty out there that I would be just mindful of.
Okay.
Especially
Real.
look at the age of the protagonist. If the age of the protagonist, sometimes, like in this case, she's 12. So if the age of the protagonist is 16,
Mm-hmm.
15, 16, then maybe there's going to be some things happening that you don't want your 11-year-old or 10-year-old reading about. So something to
Yeah.
consider.
That's a great tip because that can help. It'd be a quick way, right, to screen pretty quickly. So,
Yes.
okay. All right. Anything else about that one?
No, I think it's really cute. And I've even seen boys don't want to claim to have liked it, but I've seen a couple boys pick it up and they're even like, this is funny.
Okay. All right. Good. So that is Smile by Raina Tegelmeier. And then what is our last book in the book flight today?
This last one, I'm really excited about it because I did it as a read aloud with my daughter, and it's a brand new author, and he's hit it big. So this is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, a relatively new book, and he already had the sequel out. He's writing the third,
Okay.
and it's going to be made into a movie too. So it's like
Fun.
I'm so excited for him because he's a great writer, and he's um, again a new writer. So this is his debut novel, and it took off. So it's if they enjoy Harry Potter, then this is right up their alley. So
Okay.
the main character is Amari Peters, and she is I believe she's 12, maybe she's 11 in this book because we've read both of them now. And she comes from more of an urban environment. She's a young Black girl who they maybe doesn't have like she's raised by a single mother and doesn't necessarily have everything that she'd like, but she's incredibly bright. So her mom works really hard around the clock trying to support them, so she doesn't get to see her a lot. But I think she's accepted into kind of like a more of a prestigious school based on academics. And so she's, just trying to figure out her way in the world, and then add in this element where she gets an invitation to be in the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs and finds out about all these supernatural creatures that are living amongst us that you can't see and you don't realize. You think that's your neighbor down the block, but she's really a witch, and all
Okay.
these things that are happening. And so there's hilarious and creative aspects to this book, including things like, and it's not going to give it away, but playing cards and the cards kind of play back. And, well, it was just really funny
Interesting.
things like flying away and doing this stuff. And she's in all sorts of situations trying to solve the mystery of what happened to her brother. And so her brother, Quentin, who was always her idol, has been missing. And she's trying to figure this out and solve this
Okay.
mystery while figuring out, friendship issues and typical things and betrayal and trying to fit in and they do a kind of he does a kind of interesting job of having different supernatural creatures, that are um, that what's discriminate against other types of supernatural creatures. So it's kind of
Okay.
you're removed from it, but you're watching a lot of themes that play out, and they can empathize with these, one side or the other. And yeah, that they can't control being a magician. So why are they being, that's just who they are. And so there's a lot of interesting conversations that can have that are good underlying themes to discuss without being like too hot button or something that maybe
Yeah.
don't want to get into with your child at that point, or depending on every child. But it's kind of an interesting parallel. So it's
Yeah.
just a great fun book. I loved reading it. I thought it was really creative, and my daughter absolutely adored it. So I think it could be a read aloud for younger ones, or independent read, or read aloud for anybody. Honestly, I
Yeah.
liked it too.
I'm gonna have to add that to our list. Is this what sparked her interest in fantasy? Was this series? I
Yes,
know you had mentioned that.
this was is still up there, and now she's reading Percy Jackson, which I think she's wrapping up, and that she's really into the fantasy genre now. So
Yeah.
this really was the first one. I think this, and then we went through a lot of Roald Dahl
Okay.
books, which she
Yeah.
loved.
I think that as I've been dipping my toes into fantasy a little bit more, even as adults, I think they do the same, right? Where they talk about these tougher topics, but it's in this like fantasy world, so it doesn't seem so in your face of these
Yes,
topics. So it's a,
and allows you to see them almost more objectively. I don't know. It's interesting to me. Like you have no um, previous knowledge about this, so
yeah,
you can kind of just see it from the outside and it's just face value and say, wow, that is pretty unfair or something like that. I don't
yeah.
know. I
And
think
you're
it's
not emotionally charged, right? Because it's not in your realm per se. It's like up in this
exactly.
fantasy world realm. So that probably helps a lot.
Yes. And it's so creative. I just, her best friend is like one of my favorite characters. Just a loyal, creative, little inventor friend, and she makes things like this. My daughter and I will reference this now that we wish we could have one of these. It's called a sneak candle, a candle that you light it and you can only see the light, so you can be reading at night or something, and everyone thinks you're asleep because it's
That's
a sneak
fun.
candle. And her friend's like just a little genius that invents things, so it's like these different items that she will bring back and talk about those.
Oh, I love that. That sounds really fun. As you've been talking about these books, even in our last episode, I'm like, oh, I want to read that myself. That sounds really
I know.
interesting.
And some of these will work. The ones I mentioned in the last episode, a lot of girls will enjoy those too.
Yeah.
So it's not just one or the other.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And then I know we're lucky enough that you gave us a dessert pairing as well. So I guess I'll tie that one up. It was Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. And then what is our
Yes.
dessert pairing today?
So this is really important to include a book like this because a lot of girls at this age are really starting to get into they want those love stories. They're interested in reading about, couples and not romance, but young romance.
Sure.
And it's hard to find them that don't have a lot, we don't go all the way in them and
Yeah.
have all these things happening and these hard choices that I mean, I love Judy Blume, but I read, was it Forever? I read that a little too young because
Yeah.
I was flying through her books, and I remember reading that because I just grabbed it at the library and no one was really screening it, and that was a lot for me at the age I read it. And so I wanted to include a book that has all the great aspects of, that early young relationship, but they're like there's a lot of good Christian values in there and how to approach a relationship and have all the feelings with and make smart choices. And
Okay.
so it's called Glass Girl by Laura Anderson Kirk. And so I would say seven, 13 plus. Let's just
Okay.
say age 13 plus for this one. And the main character, there's a lot of things that happen in it, and beautiful writing, just beautiful writing, great values, great characters that introduce different aspects of good and bad choices. There's no profanity in it, which
Okay.
is another thing. There's really no need for it. You can write so well
Yeah.
without it. And they do it in it's a realistic way, where people would almost, it's very smart how she does it. So the main character, Meg, is 16. So again, we would look at the protagonist age and realize there's going to be maybe more content. But in this case, um, it's safe. It's
Okay.
safe to read. And so she experiences a family tragedy. Her family moves to Wyoming from Pittsburgh, and her family's kind of crumbling around this tragedy, and she's trying to navigate life and purpose, and then there's a lot of Christian aspects. How could God let this happen? How come there's evil things in the world? And she meets this boy, Henry, and he's such a solid, like, he's a Wyoming cowboy guy. He grew up on a ranch. He's just got great values, and he's kind of like the rock in her storm and helps show her how strong she can be. And it's a great, and there's just a lot of amazing quotes in there. And there's one that and she herself, Meg, is a really smart girl. And one quote I loved is she said, "My ability to form my own opinions, contrary to the temperature of the crowd in the room, came from her," which she's referencing her mother. But I like that. She tries to remain to be herself. She gets invited to
Yeah.
parties. People are making some poor choices. She's still remaining true to herself and what she wants to be and who she wants to be and how she's going to live her life. So it's just a lot of great things you want to
Yeah.
be able. This is a perfect one to have those conversations. And wow, her friend said that they were going to be doing this, but then she took her to another place and she doesn't have a ride. So now what should she do?
Yeah.
So, and then people are mistreating this person and how she handles that. And it's not always, it's not always perfect. Like that, she's not someone who's without flaws.
Sure.
She's figuring things out herself. So it's realistic. And I think it's just a great book
Yeah.
for kids.
As you're talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, you could learn so many lessons, right? In
Oh,
that.
yes.
So, and just solidify, again, your child going out into the world and being exposed to these scenarios. So,
Yes. So it's a great one, and I enjoyed reading it too. So I
yeah.
think again, adults, the writing, because there's so much beautiful writing in it. I thought it was she writes. It reminds me of Jodi Picoult and how she handles. She had one line in there about how like something they had this bit of news, and then they were drenched to their bones with worry and dread and stuff like that. The way she phrases it, like everything changed from this point,
Wow.
and things like that. It's really well written.
Does sound like beautiful writing. That was one other thing this weekend too. Sorry, I keep like saying this. There were so many gems from this conference that I got, but he mentioned reading aloud. Absolutely. But like read aloud books you want to read aloud to your kids. Like don't go grab a
Yes.
book you're like, "Oh, this is going to be brutal," cuz that vibe is going to come off of you if you're like not into the book you're reading. So, as the parent, if you're choosing the read alouds, which you probably are, choose books you want to
Yes.
read too. That will be a big tip. I was like, good to know. Like don't just read it cuz you think you need to read it. Choose what works for you too. So,
Oh, definitely. And yeah, we're the ones buying them most likely or grabbing them, and we can kind of navigate which ones we think that would be good for them to hear. And another one I'll say just randomly, Wonder. I don't know if you ever read
no.
Wonder.
Mm-mm.
Oh my goodness. I think, and they did make it into a movie. I think for some reason I know Jennifer Garner might have been in it.
Okay.
It's about a disfigured boy, and he's an amazing character.
Okay.
He's age 10, so this would be a great read aloud. It's on my list for down the line, but I'm talking about compassion and bullying and all the there's so many great lessons in it. And from what I remember, every chapter begins with a really inspirational quote.
Okay.
It's an easier read, and I would say definitely a sixth grader would be reading it independently. So you can read aloud, and it's a
Okay.
really great book.
Awesome. Well, thank you for our little extra
I know, it just came to
recommendation.
mind when you talk about, values and things.
Okay, and I'll have all these in the show notes, listeners. So we had for our last pairing was Glass Girl by Laura Anderson Kirk, and then we had a little bonus of Wonder. Do you know who the author of that is? Or
R.J. Palacio, I believe.
okay, I'll double check it for the show notes. But
Okay.
okay, so when we had Wonder. Um, so let's finish up here with our speed round of questions. So, and I came up with some new ones last night to ask you since you've already been on the show. So I think they're pretty fun. Um,
Okay.
are you a rereader?
I am not, I don't really reread, except if I'm reading it with my daughter now, reread full books. I reread a lot of the quotes from them, though. I love to highlight those quotes and go back to them
Yeah,
because I highlighted it for a reason. I took notes. So I'll go back to my notes and the notes and quotes because otherwise I'm always want to read more.
I know. That's how I feel. How do you store your quotes out of curiosity?
So I heard about your quote book. I love that. I haven't done anything like that. I have just mostly either notes on my phone or my tablet, and I'll just like copy and paste them, or I'll just save it in the Kindle. I'll open up the book and go to the highlighted things.
Okay.
I want a cooler way to do it though, but I haven't. So other than that, or putting things up on the noticing wall, like I try to put when I was in the classroom, I had a daily quote to try to like, kick off the day, inspire the kids. And I would usually have a daily like a homophone riddle or something. So I kind of do that on my noticing wall here with my daughter. But I think I would love a better way to organize quotes to be able to go back to them because there's so many great ones.
I know. And that's I do have the book, but I don't always pick it up. So that was why I asked. I just wondered if you had some great insights on that.
No, make it a speed read question for other readers and maybe we'll get
Yes, we'll
one.
get some more knowledge on it. Okay, and then what was your favorite childhood book?
So many to choose from, but I really loved the BFG
Okay.
by Roald Dahl.
Yep.
I just thought it was so crazy. And, again, it really sparked my imagination and I loved rereading it with her.
Yeah.
So I
Have you
think that
seen
would
the
be up
movie?
there. I did. I
Okay.
did. And I thought it was, I did think it was pretty good. I thought the way they made the BFG look, well, I thought they did a pretty good job. It's hard. I'm a tough critic
Yeah.
for movies after books,
Same. All right. And then if you could meet one literary character in real life, who would it be?
It would be Atticus Finch. That's why
Yeah.
I named my dog Atticus.
Oh, I love that.
And I I had a t-shirt I would wear like when I was teaching Atticus Finch as my co-pilot. 'Cause
Yeah.
when we had to wear it was like our reading week. You had to wear things that were like reading themed clothes and stuff. I just love the wisdom and the tempered responses. Like that
Yeah.
was so impressive, that character and how he handled things. And again, talked to his daughter. He always talked to his daughter and son at that higher level and wanted to know their opinions and just respected them as people in the world. And I thought that was just so interesting and just impressive. And I want to be the same way. There's
Yeah.
everything he's got. When there's so many parts of To Kill a Mockingbird that just blew me away with how he handled things. So I think I would just want to sit and talk about things and am I doing things right? And what do
Yeah.
you think, Atticus? I would love to have a conversation with him.
I reread that 2 years ago and I resonated with Atticus Finch this time. From when I read in high
Hmm.
school, I did not. I don't think I resonated with any of the characters. I feel like when I read in high school, I don't know that I like synthesized very much, but um I just resonated so much with him, like you said, as a parent. And oh, could I like just phrase things that way? Like I think that was that's a great one, great pick.
Yeah.
All right, and then for the last question, I'm sure this is different, so I kept this one. But what are you reading next?
So again, I've been reading things from your podcast, so thank you,
Yay!
and I'm excited. So the next, I have two or my next two. I want to read A Voice in the Wind by Francine Rivers after hearing about it,
Yep.
and then Atomic Habits because that's been on my list for a while. So I want to pick that up. I'm picking it up today, actually.
Oh, that's awesome. I have heard a lot about that book. It's been on my shelf, so might be time to pick that one up too. I'm loving this show of like those reminders, right? Of like, ping, pick that one up, read
Yeah.
that one next. So, um, Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time because I know it's precious.
Yes.
So thank you for giving it to us.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Lilianna and I in our discussion today on her YA book flight for girls. We'd love to hear what other books you might pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information on today's flight and any other books that we talked about today. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.